ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to this week's episode of The Couch Trip Therapy for Everyday Life. My name is Billy Courtright. That's our subject matter expert, Eddie Reece. And this episode today is one of those ripped from the headlines, I guess, personal headlines anyway. And we're going to talk about end of life and quality of life and terminal illness and familial roles and selfishness or self-centeredness or compassion or kindness. And more individuals, our loved ones, our family members, our great friends are quite aware of where this road is headed when they're diagnosed with specific cancers or mental illnesses like Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, ALS. These can be, well, they're definitely a death sentence. We don't know when, and we don't know, what the quality of that progression is going to be. But, as someone who's dealt with it firsthand in my family, most individuals suffering from this affliction or whatever affliction they're suffering for have an opinion and they have a thought in mind. And I think, when they're honest, if they're honest, and they were like, I don't want that. I don't want to be here for that. And so Eddie and I were having this conversation, as we often do before we record, about this topic. And I said, this is something I'm dealing with on a personal level. And we just had a loved one pass, and, she was in complete control of her faculties to the degree that she could kind of call her own shot. And when the medical staff recommended a feeding tube, and intubation or breathing assistance, she was quite clear without hesitation that that wasn't going to happen. But because she had the conversation in advance and let them know that, hey, I'm not going to go down that road. 71 years old. I know how this goes. I've lived a wonderful life. I love you all dearly. But please, when that day comes, let that day come. And I said, hey, Eddie, is this something that you deal with from a practitioner standpoint, where people come to you and, perhaps articulate their own frustration with a loved one, a family member, a parent, a spouse, that she doesn't want the treatment anymore. They won't take the doctor recommendations. It's like, what's
Yeah.
going on? So how does this affect from a psychotherapist perspective, working with and for a patient or a client, to help them navigate this, what I'm going to call kind of a selfish desire,
Mhm.
as opposed to more compassionately understanding the reasonable, in my opinion, wishes of someone who actually has these
Yeah.
these afflictions.
Well, I mean, the big umbrella that this is all under, where these issues come from, is that in this culture, death is not seen as kind of a regular part of life. We don't really talk about it. It's not out in the open. We do our grieving, within ourselves or within a group, and going through typical kind of somebody takes their time to die. Then there's whatever funeral process there is. Here in the South, there's a big meal after that. And then boom, that's pretty much it. So in a sense, it's like it's all supposed to be over with by then. So this thing about dying is kind of put into this box, so to speak. And oh, yeah, dying, that's something that happens at the end. And hey, you died, and everybody moves along, kind of thing. Like most emotional issues, I wish we were exposed to these things and taught about these things early on. Um, and to be taught in a way to where we have a a healthy way of looking at it, which really means a way of looking at it without a lot of fear and a lot of shame. There's an awful lot of fear and shame involved around death, dying, um, those sorts of things, long-term illnesses, because we don't see it as just that's what happens. It's a part of life. We see it as a very kind of taboo, sort of special thing. I mean, somebody gets a terminal diagnosis, and the usual early response is, "Why me?" And I think the better response is, "Why not you?" I mean, we all are terminal. I mean,
Yeah,
we
none of us are getting out of here alive.
yeah. So we're all terminal. So why not you? I mean, this just is now the way you're more than likely going to go. Others of us don't know yet. You know?
Yeah, and I think for a lot of folks, when you're dealing with that, the pain associated with the knowledge that a loved one or someone you've relied on or someone you just can't picture yourself being without, perhaps, is going, and then to
Hmm.
hear, more specific to our conversation today, their wishes of, I think that's where, and again, I have personal circumstances where I had a friend whose wife, had ALS and did everything he possibly could. We don't even know if it was within her wishes because for the last few years, she was nonverbal. I mean, it was,
Hmm.
ah, you know, and then for others, they're like, "No, no, I'm not even gonna go down that road." But, I think, how do you have a conversation with someone who's struggling with something to the effect of, "I know it's not it's their will, not my desire. I understand they're the one dealing with this,
Hmm.
but I'm struggling with my fear of having them gone or not with me,"
Yeah.
or, like, how does that conversation go?
Well, there's a lot of different things involved. It's not unusual for, say, a couple who have been together for 50, 60, 70 years. One partner dies, the other dies shortly after that. And even if they were in decent health, and in a sense, they're really dying of a broken heart. And I think in the way that I think about something like that is, and to your question, what's the conversation about? How is it that you look at this relationship in such a way that you feel like you can't go on without the other person? That emotionally is not healthy because you're, in a sense, saying you're a parasite, that if my host dies, I die, So, why is it that you're looking, or what is it about the way you look at the relationship that says, I just can't go on? And you want to work through that. An ideal kind of sense of, oh, my loved one is going to die is it will devastate me, the loss is gonna be tremendous, um, and I know how to grieve, I know what the grieving process is like, I know that in a situation like this, I will never, ever be finished with grieving. They will be a part of my life for the rest of my life. I'll have a relationship with them the rest of my life. Even though the body won't be here, that person won't be here, death ends the life of a body, not a relationship. So I understand all these things, and I've processed those in a number of different ways with a number of different people or pets or inanimate objects that I've lost that were precious to me. So I'm very good at that process. So it's a part of what happens. And I think without that, which I think most of the people in our culture don't have that, you can apply it not only to a relationship, but the way you live your life. Because on some level, we do have knowledge that we're going to die. Even if we're in total denial of thinking about it or dealing with it or exploring our feelings about it, we know it's going to happen. And we tend to picture it as something you don't want. And I watched last night William Shatner, the guy that played Captain Kirk in Star Trek. He and Neil deGrasse Tyson are doing a tour thing where they have these conversations. And Shatner's 90 years old now,
Yeah.
and so they were talking about the subject of dying, and he said, he said, I have and have had in my life so much love around me. He said, I just don't want to leave that. And that makes all the sense in the world, and I don't want to leave that. I would add to it, and at the same time, I know that I will at some point, and therefore I've prepared myself over the decades to be able to do that. And so that's what I would wish for people. But that's a lot of personal growth
Yeah.
over a long time. And in ancient philosophies, this is talked about a great deal, that you want to live your life in a way that you're preparing for your own death. So that, in a sense, an awful lot of things you're doing prepare you for the inevitable. And that's, in my way of thinking, the things you're doing in your life is you're learning, you're growing, you're saying, oh, this is a loss. Okay, loss involves grief. I learned how to grieve. And you learn how to grieve losing your favorite toy, when you're a child, and you work your way through pets, and then the people in your life, and job losses, or your house burns down, or your car's total. I mean, there's losses all along, and we've talked about this in another podcast of talking about grief, that it's an everyday thing. And so as you practice that and get better at it, you are better able to take on the bigger grief in your life, which is going to be the loss of the most beloved people in your lives. And then eventually, hopefully you love yourself enough to where when you die, that's a big loss too. As Shatner said, I just don't want to leave. It's going to be a big loss. Care about myself, care about these people, rather than somebody who is in a stereotypical suicidal situation and thinks they have nothing to live for, and they're really worthless, and so it's no loss at all. And that's the mindset you would be in to kill yourself, because
Mm.
you're ending a lot of pain and misery. Um, so you want to be the opposite of that, in a sense.
Mhm.
Live your life that way.
Let's flip this a little bit, and what advice might you have for someone for whom the terminal diagnosis has just been given,
Mm,
and they're wrestling with, evaluating, trying to figure out how to broach that subject with their loved ones,
mhm,
where, they've contemplated and reflected and come to a determination like, "Hey, this is," whether it's a simple DNR, whether it's a if this, then that. I know there are states that likely hear or watch our podcast where human euthanization is actually a thing, and,
mhm.
It's not in Georgia, I don't think, and I know it's not in Florida,
Right.
but anyway, what advice might you have for someone who's like, "How do I tell my daughter? How do I tell my husband or my wife? How do I do this?"
When somebody says, how do I tell somebody this? I I think that what they're really saying is, how can I tell somebody this in a way that won't hurt them or hurt them too badly? And my answer is always some version of, you just tell them, I've got a terminal illness and that means I'm going to die, at sometime in the very near future. If you don't have an exact kind of thing, that's how you tell them. And then you listen. We're back to the kindness dialogue. You're the listener at that point. You're not there to talk to them about it. You're there to hear what they have to say. So, and again, somebody wouldn't need to ask that question if they have done all these other things that I'm talking about in their lives, uh, because it would be, oh, we had a terminal illness. Okay, all right. Well, who are the people I've got to go and tell now? And you just start doing it. You wouldn't be thinking, well, how do I tell them? Hey, I got some bad news. Just got back from the doctor, and here's what he said.
Mm,
Here's what the diagnosis is. Here's how here's how it's gonna go as best we know.
mm. And do you think it's any different or for someone who's making end of life decisions where loved ones may or may not need to know?
Well, again, in an ideal kind of life, those decisions, have already been made. They were made a while back, and discussed a while back with people that would be involved in the nuts and bolts of the end of a life. So you've got your medical directive, you've got your will and your estate planning, anything, along those lines. That's there. And if you did it, in your 30s or 40s or even 50s, things may change after that, and so those are ongoing conversations, to where, like in your situation, a family member gets a diagnosis. Hopefully, that would bring up conversations within the family of, if that happened to me or if that happened to you, what would we do? So that those things are out in the open. That's the real damage of shame, is that people go, "Oh, that's going to be an uncomfortable situation," meaning there's shame attached to that. To whereas if there were no shame, it would be, "Oh, wow, I was really upset when I heard about the diagnosis. Yeah, me too." Boy, and I thought about what it would be like if I got that diagnosis and how I would handle that. Yeah, it's a good topic, and you just start talking about it. There's several books that have come out recently. One of them is "I'm Dead Now What," and it's just a bunch of blank pages, so you can write all the stuff in there. My favorite title is "Nobody Wants Your Shit." So it's about, how to clean out uh, your house, because nobody wants it. So there is more now, and I think that's probably to some degree in that, the generation I'm in, the baby boomers, I'm kind of at the tail end of them. We're a big group, and we're dying off pretty quickly. So, I think there may be more talk about these sorts of things, in the near future. But it's going to come back to the state of your mental and emotional health as to how well you're going to handle this.
Yeah, I think it's very relevant. I think it's pertinent in my life and clearly in your practice. And again, we're you know, like I had this conversation with my wife, and because I have a fairly large family, she has a fairly large family. They're all, the younger aunts and uncles are in their 60s, the olders are in their 80s, and
Mhm.
it's getting to the point now where every time the phone rings, it's like your heart skips a beat. But
Mm.
that is just, I think, the product of where we are. Inevitably, we talked about this. You know, at some point, you're gonna look around and realize, who's gone, and hopefully you have a sincere appreciation for who's left. Um,
Sure. Oh, yeah, I mean, in my mom's side of the family, which is the big part of my family, I'm the 3rd eldest. So, it's when I'm around them, uh, we went on a family cruise this past week. Uh, I'm around them. I mean, I'm very aware of that, you know. And so I have my 2 aunts, and then there's me. So I'm the 3rd oldest in the group, so I'm definitely sitting at the grown up table, and so it's an interesting kind of moment to really reflect back and sort of do what I'm talking about, take time to examine how I'm looking at my own mortality, my own life, and how it relates to these folks, and remembering, when I was, these kids' age, and the people that were around that aren't here now, and um, just kind of seeing the flow of life in a sense.
you know, I I don't have an opinion on. I mean, I certainly know what the Hippocratic Oath is, and I understand the way doctors and pharmaceutical companies and nursing practitioners look at their career, and there's a certainly an element of do no harm, but then there's also
Mhm.
seemingly an element of how many breaths can you take? Like literally, like
Mhm.
how long can we keep you around? And as we're talking about mortality and terminal illness and conversations, you brought up a little while ago quality of life, and I think more and more, we're just more and more aware of what these diagnoses ultimately mean,
Mhm.
and we're seeing it more and more with our families and baby boomers, and now I'm Gen X, but I'm seeing family members all over the place
Oh, yeah.
live through these conditions. And a conversation happened within my family about wishes. And you talked about it a minute ago, like make your wishes known and to handle your your will and trust and medical directives and all those things. And it's a controversial topic, I think, because again, it's just jarring for me personally, so I don't know if it's for everyone, but it's jarring when you hear someone say, "I don't want anything." Like, I don't if I go, I go. I don't want anybody keeping me around a minute longer, and I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot. I've heard that in my
Mm.
personal family. I've heard that a lot, and
Mhm.
it's usually from people that are comfortable, older, uh, reflective, very pensive, like, they're not emotionally, like, reactive people. They're people who are probably more reflective than most, and I guess they're looking back at their life and they're saying, "This has been a good run." Like I'm okay."
Yeah. Yeah, my my hesitation about that is I would want to explore what they're saying, given that they're given an extreme sort of thing, I don't want nothing, and the attitude is that I picture that being said as is a pushing away, and so I would be curious how to go, oh, so you don't want any sort of heroic measures or anything to keep you going. No, no, no. If I'm taking my last breath, let me take it. And say, so you want to go out with that last breath, and then I'd say, I'm curious. What if it looked like your last breath, but a doctor knew what to do to revive you in a way that you could live another 6 months, a year? Would you want them to go ahead and let you go then? You know, and I was just wondering. And so, just to get a conversation going,
I think that's brilliant.
or well, that's interesting. You wanna take that last breath. How do you imagine your life, in the 3 months going up to that last breath? And if they pictured a life where they were mobile and moving around, and boom, something happened and it happened really quick and it looked like they were headed to the, even if it was just general medical knowledge that you could be revived from this possible last breath and get you back pretty close to where you were before you got this illness? I mean, do you still want to go? Um, so,
These are courageous conversations, in my opinion.
well, you know, courageous in that there's so much shame wrapped around all this stuff. But
Well, fear, at least.
I think, and the fear is the fear of shame, and so it pushes people to make a decision like, oh, I don't want to be revived, sort of quickly without a lot of thought, without a lot of what ifs. We don't know what the circumstances are going to be, which is why I was saying earlier, as you get older, you want to keep talking about this stuff. And if you knew the end was coming in some way, shape, or form, and if it were some sort of a thing, that could go on for 8, 10 years, before you died and progressed along the way to continually talk about, okay, this is the way it's going. I think I can live with this for a while. And if it goes over to this direction, or if it takes a turn in that direction, you go, okay, that's it for me. I don't want to do this anymore. Um,
Yeah.
if you're going through some sort of treatment, chemo, and it's been going on for a long time, and then at some point, wow, I mean, do you, at some point, you just go, hey, this is just, even if we can get rid of this cancer, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm X years old. I've lived long enough. I'm very satisfied with the life I have. I don't feel like going through this kind of awfulness for a chance of a little more time.
Right.
And and from the way I would look at that from my point of view, and I don't. I think it's a waste of time and money for everybody around me. I get another 3 months or something. I mean, but I'm sick. I can't move. I can't get out of the hospital, and they're coming in and giving me more stuff, and it just makes me sicker. And you got to hang around. I mean, this is just silly, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's not a quality of life that any of us want.
Yeah. No, I get it. And I think you gave some really sound and beautiful advice for someone who, you know, is faced with that conversation and those probing questions that you mentioned, like, just to get further clarification and to really
Hmm.
show some pause, but still be I think for folks, bookmark that 5 minutes, because if ever you're in a situation where you gotta have a conversation with an older family member who's making their wishes known, that's a really intelligent way, Eddie, to handle that conversation in a way that
Mhm.
shows interest and compassion, but at the same time seeking some clarification because to your point, some of us are, you know, gonna see a long, slow, steady decline, and others, will have a massive stroke coming off the golf course and literally go from, shooting 85 to, they have to be fed.
Mhm.
And those to me are the most jarring when it's like it was unexpected and it's quite compromising in quality of life. And at that point,
Yeah.
like if you hadn't
Well,
had the conversation beforehand, you're not having it then.
yeah, and they said things like that are unexpected. Again, in an ideal life, it wouldn't be.
Correct. But we both know.
Yeah, it's not like you're sitting around going, "I wonder when I'll have a stroke," It's not like you're doing that, but all of a sudden, boom, you're having a stroke. It shouldn't be a surprise, I mean, because people get strokes. Folks are it's always a sadder story if a child gets cancer, why? "Oh, well, they haven't had a chance to live their life, and, well, who said they were supposed to?" Children die all the time of all sorts of things. So it's not anything unusual. Now, that doesn't mean it's not supposed to be upsetting or whatever. But I think what people actually do is they would take something like, "Oh, it's a child. They're a child," and they focus on that because it's somehow more acceptable to be upset about that than someone is dying, someone that I care about. It doesn't matter that it's a child or not a child. This is death. This is the grief. This is what happens to all of us. And when it happens is, you know, who knows? I mean,
Mhm.
we all tend to live with this idea that we all die in order, and but we don't.
Huh.
Um,
I haven't found an expiration date on the bottom of my
yeah,
foot.
yeah. So who knows how it's gonna go. So I guess the theme as I listen to myself talk about this is it's sort of like all kinds of medical advice about what's the best way to prevent Alzheimer's, what's the best way to have good sleep, what's the best way to lose weight, what's the best way to be healthy. I mean, it's all the same thing. It's your day to day life needs to be a particular way. It needs to be healthy all along in order for those things. So, well, how do I handle a death? How do I handle your day to day life? You do that, and that's how it works. Eat right, exercise. You know.
But Eddie, I've challenged you. I mean, I'm not telling you your business, but I think I think for a lot of us, just hearing you so matter of factly in a straightforward nature talk about, hey, you've said it 3 times now, like in a normal, well lived life, or however you
Mm-hmm.
phrased it, these things would have been discussed. But the reality is,
Mm-hmm.
they're not.
Yeah,
And
they're
and
not. Yeah.
and
So
I think
the
I think it's really important that you're giving this counsel because there's
yeah
somebody listening to this that's gonna have a conversation with their father or their mother or their spouse
right.
today.
Yeah. If if you're like most of us, you haven't lived your life the way I'm talking about, so get started. Start today. If you've never exercised, start today. No better time. So yeah, go and begin to have those conversations. You get some professional help on how to do that. There's so much, and I've been reading a little bit lately about folks writing who work in ICUs and stuff and watch people die all the time and listen to them. The general theme is something I've heard all along is that people aren't so upset about their death. What they're upset about is all the things they didn't do when they were alive. All the experiences they wanted to have, all the things they wanted to say to people, all the things they really wanted to do and wanted to be. So it's a life not lived, and I will challenge that those things didn't happen because of some sort of cultural shaming that goes on that says you can't do that. You're not supposed to do that. You're living this life, so you need to live that life. That's good enough. You don't want to run off and join the circus, but I mean, if that's really what you've been wanting all your life, and run off and join the circus. I mean,
Yeah.
you only got one shot at this, and I know for longest time, as long as I can remember, I've tried to look at my own death that way, and there's plenty of things that if I died today, I'd be, crap, really wanted to do that, but I didn't, and maybe I can in some instances, but a lot of it, it's too late, So that that's the whole point of this. It's not so much about how do we have these conversations. It's how do you live your life day to day so that you can have these conversations, that you want to have these conversations. You look forward to these conversations, that they're not awkward. It's a part of course, this is what we do. And again, it just comes back to doing everything you can to have as healthy an emotional life as you can have, free, which means free of as free as you can be of fear and shame, those sorts of things, and which enables you to explore who you are and then be that.
Eddie, I think there's some brilliant nuggets of wisdom and counsel in today's episode. For those listening or watching on YouTube, please, throw some comments at us, questions, concerns, share stories. I'd love to hear someone tell me that, hey, hearing the podcast motivated me to have a conversation with my parent or loved one, and here's how it went. And surprisingly enough, I'm still here, and we're closer now and feeling more connected, and I'm certainly more understanding of who they are and what's important to them, and I think at the end of the day, it can be, to your point, a tremendous act of compassion
Mhm.
to, align yourself with, again, the kindness dialogue that you preach and that is so incredibly effective, to express some curiosity and to probe with compassion, and to do so with kindness in an effort to establish understanding, if nothing else. And then if that leads to a bucket list activity of knocking some things off the list that
Mhm.
haven't been done and could be, man, it warms my heart to think of the value that this specific episode could provide. And again, it came from some genuine life circumstances my family deals with. Your
Mhm.
family's obviously, no doubt, will deal with if haven't already. And I'm motivated to have conversations, you know, with people about, hey, let's get this figured out. Like what just for that point of not having it be a surprise and not living with the regret of, I wish I would have had this conversation before. But again, I'll let Eddie wrap us up. But this did, although this subject matter certainly brings about thoughts of grief or remorse or regret or sadness or a bunch of other emotions that may or may not be exciting to listen to on the treadmill if that's where you're listening to us. Hopefully, there's a lesson here or some sound counsel that can actually deliver more joy and more
Mhm.
connection, more time, more understanding. And
Yeah.
again, whether someone's around for another 6 years, 6 months, or 6 days, I'm motivated to spend more time investigating and with curiosity finding out what their vision for their end of days, whenever they uh, are. And in so doing, I'll likely spend more quality time and have a greater appreciation for our relationship. So I think there's a silver lining to this episode that I didn't expect, but I just wanted to express my gratitude because, I'm going to call my dad
Mhm.
and we're going to talk about some things. And, we never talk enough. So, but anyway, this has been a compelling episode of the Couch Trip Therapy for Everyday Life. And I'll let Eddie bring us home.
Yeah, listening to what you're saying, I can imagine that folks that might have tuned into this podcast, you know, have some heavy feelings that they're dealing with, and my hope for you is that you find good counsel, people that you can share those with, who truly listen with kindness and curiosity, so that you don't do what too many of us do and just keep it to yourself and try to metabolize it within yourself, which doesn't work very well. So that you find that person, those people, or that community that you can share those things with, and learn to be with those feelings in a way that isn't scary and isn't so heavy.
Yeah.
Again, it's a part of who you are. It's a part of living. And to live your fullest life, you want to experience all human emotions.
We've talked about it since episode one. The ability to experience the entire human experience or live the entire human experience has been a goal of ours as we produce these conversations as podcast episodes and blog posts and Substacks and Medium and wherever you consume us. So again, I feel good about this conversation, Eddie. I appreciate you. Thank you to all listening. Make sure if you're enjoying this, you don't keep us a secret, and we'll catch you next week.
Alrighty. Bye, folks.